Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Catholic Talk Show. Today, we're going to be talking about the 7 best popes of all time.
Yeah, these men who sat on the chair of St. Peter influenced society, culture, and the world in ways that few men ever have.
Real popes of genius. They're the best.
All right. Well, I mean, let's dig in. This is going to be a good episode. I'm really curious to find out, because I do a lot of background work on the shows. I do a lot of research and, I'm really
Friends,
curious.
this is entirely untrue.
Research and development.
They all know it.
He rolls out of bed.
People be face tweeting me. All right, about it. All right.
Like, Dennis Cross, you're doing so much excellent research.
I see where you're at.
When do you sleep, bro?
That's right. So about 3 or 4 times a day in my chair.
You do.
Okay, so I'm curious, like, where did this list come from?
And I'm impressed by the list. So great job, dude, because these are some impressive popes. And the thing that I love about them most is that they were a number of them are reformers. And they're truly revolutionary to their time period. And they had no fear of confronting ideologies of their days that were crippling a lot of Europe and a lot of the world. So
these are paradigms of both manliness and holiness and of the Petrine ministry, but I can't take full credit for compiling this list.
Really?
So I was lucky enough to be able to reach out to one of my favorite authors and a guy who wrote one of the books that I've probably read more than just about any book, and that's Vicars of Christ, and it's a history of the papacy by Charles A. Coulomb. And he was gracious enough when I sent him a message to help compile this list. So it was a real honor and, a shout out to him.
Oh, for sure.
And definitely go out and look for that book. It's an incredible book. It takes the history of the entire papacy and allows you to, in a very engaging and narrative way, understand the flows of the histories of the church through the lens of the chair of St. Peter. So check it out. But
check that out.
And I think, most people wouldn't return a phone call back from Ryan. I think if it weren't for our listeners, like, you probably wouldn't get return phone calls.
Look, one of the great things about the talk show that we're doing here, that, we've been at this for over a year now, and we're doing pretty good. We got listeners on 6 continents, and there might even be a penguin or 2 on Antarctica who listens to us.
So you're saying that I could reach out to anybody now and
maybe. I mean, they're calling Ryan back.
Man. So you're saying there's hope.
There's always hope.
For you,
for me.
Maybe.
Yeah,
but him, it's already been confirmed.
Clearly. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Look, I could reach out
I'm
to one
going
of
to
my
start
favorite
emailing authors.
Yeah, I could reach out to one of my favorite authors and be like, happy to help. So
they're going to know you don't read a lot.
Yeah.
Just by the way you talk to them. So, all right. So because we have a great listener base and Ryan can get phone calls back, why don't you tell everybody where they can find us?
So
and
if
share
you
with
do
their
read,
friends?
I need you to read that URL up there, URL, and put in the Catholic Talk Show, okay? When you do, you're going to be able to subscribe, get emails from us, and then you'll see every way that you could listen in or view on YouTube. And be sure, especially if you're a YouTube fan, and even if you're not, go to YouTube right now.
Do it.
Put the Catholic Talk Show in,
URL.
Subscribe, and put that little bell. I want you to click the little bell, and when you do, you're going to get every single video that we produce right into your happy home or on your tablet or your phone. So, my friends, we're going to jump into this. The popes, the greatest popes. Before we do, we want to give a shout out to our greatest Patreons, because our patrons are the ones that are making sure that this show continues. So we want to thank you very much for that. And if you are considering becoming a patron, please go to patreon.com/The Catholic Talk Show. And that's the way that you can help us continue to grow this show.
All right.
So who's the first pope? I mean, we've got to give a shout out to,
Right. So I didn't think it would be fair on the list of 7 best popes to have an unfair, I guess, comparison to the greatest pope, and that's St. Peter.
And Jesus himself chose him. So, I mean, that's kind of important.
That's right. Now, you can't really top that. So I didn't think that including him would make sense.
Yeah.
So, but he definitely deserves mention. I mean,
honorary mention, right?
Not even,
Did the author mention him?
He's like in a class in and of himself.
He is.
Right.
It's like how George Washington, they actually passed a law in Congress that there can never be a general that outranks him. So he's actually he's the nation's only 6-star general. You can never have a general with more stars than George Washington.
I didn't realize that. That's a neat little tidbit.
And it's kind of the same thing with Pope Peter.
Yeah.
Which is, you don't really say Pope Peter, but
Papa Pete.
Yeah. But he deserves to be on this list. He was the one selected by Jesus himself. He is the rock, and it is his chair. And all of these popes are his successors. So I think definitely making sure that we mention him, but in the context of this list, Peter deserves his own episode because that's, he's the pillar of the church.
For sure. Delacroix, in your experience of St. Peter through the scriptures and in your devotion and your travels, what would you say are some of his greatest attributes?
Well, I get a lot of hope from him in scripture because, the dude wasn't right. He just time and time again, just proved that he was not worthy of, running a shop in a store somewhere.
Well, that's not true. He was an excellent fisherman, and he ran a good fishing business.
Multiple nets, multiple boats. So he was a successful businessman.
All right. Well, we're making these are claims that you're making that we can substantiate.
They're certainly inferred from the gospel.
I draw a lot of inspiration and hope. I draw a lot of tenderness from his heart to Jesus and the contrition that he has. For not believing, the fact that, he wasn't there when Jesus was crucified, that, before the cock crowed 3 times, those types of things really give me a lot of hope that God is really merciful and it helps me to engage with the mercy of God more freely than say, some sort of righteousness that could pervade my consciousness,
I completely agree with that. And I think to sum it up, my experience is malleable. He's malleable in the hands of the potter, he's malleable in the hands of God. And it's because of his humility. He recognizes his faults, but he doesn't run away because of his failure.
Yeah.
He continues to return to the hands of God. He continues to return to the hands of Christ, who is forming him to be this great leader. But ultimately, it comes down to the fact that he's malleable. He can truly be molded into this position.
Because in Acts, he did a lot of great works, and preached and, gave his life, for Christ. And so, you definitely see that this man, becoming an apostle and becoming the first leader of the church.
For sure.
It's beautiful.
What's that saying though? It's he does not call the qualified. God does not call the qualified. He qualifies those whom he calls.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think Peter is a perfect example of that. Yeah. But as we go through this list, no doubt in my mind that humility in the sense of being malleable in the hands of God is absolutely stringed through all of these people.
You keep saying malleable, and I think it's, looking at geology, how rocks are formed. They start off as hot magma typically, right? And then they're formed.
Magma.
And
I like where you're going with this.
They are cooled and tempered and turned into rock.
We'll keep it going.
And they're heated by outside pressures. And I think the same with Simon.
Excellent.
With Simon Bar-Jonai, he was heated by the pressure of being with the Lord, and then he was turned into magma and then cooled, and through that process became a rock.
Ooh. Now, can I say, we always hit the heresy button. That's been consistent from our first show. But every now and then, there's a brilliant button that comes out.
And that doesn't happen too often.
Brilliant.
That's from all the research that I did.
So you told him before the show?
Hot magma.
He did. He wrote that. I'm just reading what Ryan writes for me.
That's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah, man. I love that, dude. That's excellent.
My favorite story of Peter in the Gospels when after the resurrection, when he sees Jesus at the shore and he just jumps off the boat. He ties up his robes, jumps off the boat, and swims.
Yeah.
That is
leaving the catch.
Yeah, and leaving everyone else behind.
Leaving everybody else.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
That's awesome.
I can't imagine, it's not in scripture, but I can't imagine if being there when Mary saw Jesus for the first time too.
Yeah.
That would have been beautiful.
So, as we're talking about the papacy and the 7 best popes, we have to talk Matthew 16, 18, and why there is even a pope. And that's because Jesus knew that he wasn't always going to be here in his earthly ministry, and that he would need a vicar to execute the will for that Jesus' will for the church, and to protect the church, and to be the sign of unity, and to provide just like he provided for Peter in the storm a safe ship. He needed someone to provide a safe ship for the Christians that would follow. And in Matthew 16:18, he says that, I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. And 2,000 years later, we've had great popes. We've had terrible popes. We had mediocre popes. We've had popes who were killed. We've had popes who were all sorts. And
We've had popes who had pet elephants.
we have.
Wow.
Yeah.
We've had popes with fancy shoes
Or normal shoes.
or normal shoes.
Or sandals.
Sandals, right?
Yeah.
Or no shoes.
I wonder if we ever had a pope with Birkenstocks. Those are pretty comfortable.
You
Here's a
probably
shout
don't
out to
know.
one of our sponsors, Birkenstock.
They're not one of our sponsors. But yeah, the Petrine ministry is incredibly important to both the lives of Christians, as a sign of unity, as a ship in the storm, and as a way to arbiter what will naturally happen throughout history, that there's going to be disputes and uncertainty on how to live in the light of the gospel. And that, I think all of these 7 popes really typify that. They really exercise the Petrine ministry in a excellent and
Well, I mean, just the foundation that all these popes had, it was Peter giving his life, and then the next 33 or whatever were all martyred too as well, right? So you had this, like, for centuries, the Pope was, generally speaking, martyred.
And talk about the seedbed of the church and the development and the evangelical curve of what was happening. It was done and commissioned through the martyrdom of these popes. And the Roman martyrs. And I mean, it's impressive to think about that. It's a great point, Ryan.
all right. So
Thanks,
we get into
Father.
the list.
Hey, Ryan Delacrosse.
Thanks, Father. I'm just
You are
reading
so
my notes
smart,
over here.
man. You're just a good reader. You should read at Mass. Are you a lector? You read so well.
He's Hannibal Lecter. Just butchers it every time. Remember the Mass that we had? Remember that? So we were celebrating Mass in the studios once before, and remember he starts reading.
Yes.
He starts reading the epistle, and he's like, "Someone want to read this? I'll just read it."
It's like the crossing thought of Ryan Delacrosse.
So-
Anybody?
So we
Anyone on
had
it?
about 10
Okay, I'll
people
read it.
in this Mass, you know, and me and Father both understand Ryan's ways. And for some reason, I looked up at him, and when we made eye contact, we were like,
And then we had to hold our breath and like look down.
It was so hard not to
Oh,
laugh.
I know.
Oh my gosh.
Those are the best moments.
best.
They're the best.
All
They're
right.
the best.
Let's get into the 7 best popes.
Okay.
Okay, first one on our list of best popes, we selected Pope Leo the Great. Pope Leo the Great was the first pope to earn the title the Great, and naturally he should appear in any list of best popes. He was pope in the early to mid 5th century. And his writings, the guidance he gave to the church at a very pivotal time, about 100 years after the legalization of Christianity, when it was really becoming, still, I would say the church as we know it now is in its formative phases. And this is after a few of the councils that really defined our doctrine. And his stewardship and his shepherding of the church through these times laid the foundation for the next 1,500 years, to where if it had not been for this pope and this period of time, the church would have looked remarkably different. You know, some of the things that Leo accomplished in his papacy, he really set up the administration of the church in ways that had never been organized before. He's a real organizer. Now, I know you, now as the pastor of John Paul II in Nagati, you definitely can have some sympathy at the difficulties of organizing just the day-to-day structure and the running of the church. It's not an easy task, and it's one that a lot of people misunderstand or don't appreciate enough about priests, is that there's a lot of administrative work.
There is.
Yeah.
You know?
And I was on a phone call prior to this episode that we're shooting
Yeah,
for
I know.
about 30 minutes, specifically addressing that.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
he was an excellent administrator, and he set up the structures that would allow the church to flourish. It allowed it to be able to evangelize new lands because there was such a good organization. And Good organization, I mean, it can't be overstated. Now, he also was instrumental in fighting the heresy of Pelagianism. And
Pelagianism?
Pelagianism was essentially the heresy that grace was not necessary for salvation, but was a gift God gave it to special people. So it was really a heresy talking about the nature of grace and the nature of grace's necessity in salvation.
And Pelagian, it was a complete rejection of a biblical sense of grace, and how, we always hear the sense grace builds on nature. We depend on God's grace, and it is by way of God's grace that we choose what we ought to. Yeah. And we choose what is good. We choose the virtue. And that's what Augustine really was fighting as well. But Leo the Great is that person who was championing along with Augustine.
It's also kind of curious that the church would need organizational leadership at this time, because it was just made legal. Yeah. Like less than 100 years prior, the practice of the Christian faith was made legal, and then this is probably out after the Arian heresy, like this kind of like the newer.
And when you think of the person of the Vicar of Christ, what Sheil was sharing before, Jesus is entrusting this ministry and commissioning it in the person of the Vicar of Christ, and him tending the flock. And the 12 apostles and the successors of the apostles were governed in thought by the magisterial teachings of the church. So we need that, because the thought is what precedes the action. So our action should be rooted in the thoughts that are deeply orthodox and theological and philosophical in nature, that will ultimately build this collaborative effort of unity and really tend to the flock so that we are one.
Amen,
That we're not separating ourselves.
Theology matters.
Yeah, theology matters. It does.
Now, another thing that I think in the context of, let's go to this point first. Another thing that has made me his most famous writing was the Tome of St. Leo. So at the Council of Chalcedon, this was I guess the second part, you can almost call this the sequel to Nicaea, right? Nicaea really dealt with the nature of Christ, but Chalcedon then had to talk about, there's two natures of Christ, right? Is there two wills? What is the nature of Christ himself, not in relation to the Father, but in relation to himself as true man and true God? And that's what Chalcedon sought to clarify. Now, there was a heresy, I think it's called monothelitism. I don't think I pronounced that right. Mono something. Look it up.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I read more than I talk, okay? So I know the word when I look at it.
Chalcedon.
Yeah. I got that right.
You said Chalcedon.
Did I?
Yes.
I don't care.
That's all right. I forgive you.
All right. Anyway.
We love you, Sheil.
So Leo really helped to formulate the doctrine that Christ, that was defined there, that he does have two complete natures, human and divine, and that there was that in him, the hypostatic union between the divine and the human natures, and that there were not some kind of weird half-breed intermingling of a half God, half man. And it really, Jesus Christ is true God and true man. And
fully man,
yes,
fully God.
So he helped define that, which is incredibly important. And there was actually a big split of the church at the time. Even till this day, you'll have non-Chalcedonian Christians, like some of the Coptics and some of the churches of the East, particularly like the former Assyrian churches.
And then the consideration of Judaism and our Islam brothers and sisters, they look at the person of Jesus Christ not in the sense of his divinity, that he is God made man, but they look to him as like a prophet or someone of notoriety, and yeah.
So I mean, if you look at the Coptic Christians today in Egypt, they're very old and very historic and have apostolic roots, but they split with the church, and they are non because of this issue. So that's really the big divide between them. So it was a historically important issue. And going back, Egypt at the time was, I mean, in the middle of the 5th century, you had the Western Empire, the Eastern Empire, and Egypt, and they were really, all three of them were as powerful. That was the patriarchal see of St. Mark. I mean, it was an important part of the church that split off over this issue. So it can't be overstated how important it was, his clarification. Now, two things that are really important about him that make him the great. So if you look at the context of his lifetime in the middle of the 4th century, what was happening? The Roman Empire was falling. And this institution that had held the world together for centuries was disintegrating rapidly. And the last Roman emperor was overthrown in 476. So he is basically, he's in Rome as the world is crumbling around. I mean, imagine right now, I don't know, what would happen if the United States government crumbled? Where would the world be? This is the context that he is living in at the time. There's no civil services. People are starving. There's being raiding vandals and barbarians and attacks at all times. Society is falling around everywhere. And Leo's leadership in this context basically established that the church would be the thing that came in and filled the power vacuum of the Roman Empire, and essentially is what set up the whole structure of the Middle Ages for the next 1,000 years, that the church would be at the center of society because it was the only one that was structured well enough, had a clear enough leadership that was able to guide the world. And without Leo, we would have been in the Dark Ages forever. And Leo's the only thing that really, his papacy helped to prevent a much deeper decline in civilization after the fall of Rome.
I mean, even when Rome was under attack, and it was Leo courageously who stood up to the Vandals, stood up to the barbarians, stood up to Attila, and
I mean, could you imagine?
I mean,
this old pope. I mean, because he was old at the time.
but I relate him to St. Peter too, because we look at his victory, and I think Leo, we just look how powerful of a person he was, but you just wonder what was happening in the inner chamber of his prayer that is undocumented, because he's entirely surrounded by ideologies that are attacking Christianity. And now he's looking at a true force that can absolutely wipe them out.
The Huns had taken over enormous amounts of Europe. They were at the door of Rome, and they were going to burn Rome to the ground, because that's what they did. Attila the Hun was a magnificently successful destroyer and conqueror, and he is at the gates of Rome with the Huns. I mean, just the idea of Attila the Hun in people's head is this guy is a barbarian king who just tears through anything in his path. And the only thing separating Attila and the Huns from the people of Rome and the eternal city was this old man in robes.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of... This is a kid's show, so that takes a lot of gumption, But
that's why I love the relief over Leo the Great's altar in the Vatican, because it just shows his prayerfulness and his dependence on St. Peter and St. Paul, and how they flight to his aid. So the divine assistance that we have in relationship to our faith in the battles that we face is right there. And that's why prayer is so ultimately important. The Quo Vadis, Jesus on the road with Peter, like, where are you going? And Jesus is carrying his cross into Rome to be crucified again. It's like that same type of mustering up courage through the witness and testimony of the victory that Christ has won in the lives of the saints and the lives of these popes. And I think it's so important to realize that Leo the Great is such an example, and there is an intercessor for us in our own battles.
Yeah, Leo the Great saved theology. He saved the administration of the church. He saved the church for what it would be for the next 1,000 years by establishing the church as the thing that would fill the power vacuum of the Roman Empire, and physically saved Rome by confronting Attila personally at the gates. So without Leo the Great, the church and history looks incredibly different. That's why he's on this list. All right.
Yep.
So
Reformer.
Leo the Great, pray for us.
Pray for us, my
All
brother.
right.
And plus, I need some administrative help. Pray for me, my brother.
Yeah. St. Richie the Great.
Who else is named the Great?
There's only one other pope officially given the title of the Great.
Gregory the Great. But I always talk about JP too, like John Paul.
Don't give it away what they're going to pay for, man. What are you doing?
All right, my bad.
All right.
My B.
So the second pope on our list And going with the theme of greatness, because when you're doing a list of the best, you have to start with greatness. And that's Pope St. Gregory the Great. Now, Pope St. Gregory the Great, he was Pope in the 580s, so about 150 years after Pope St. Leo. And some of the things that Pope Gregory the Great accomplished, he accomplished a lot, but he was the first monk to ever be elected Pope. He had been a Benedictine monk. So he brought that monastic and prayerful way of life to the papacy, and through that established a lot of the traditions and a lot of the ways.
Did they have the College of Cardinals back then like we do now when they're elected Pope?
Not yet.
What is
that came later in the history
of
the church.
So what was the tradition for passing the torch here?
Then like the archdeacons and the priests of the archchurches of Rome would basically come to a consensus, and the emperor, so either the Byzantine emperor, if you're talking about the Ravenna Exarchate, would ratify it, or later the Holy Roman Emperor would ratify it. But it was more of a popular election. Everyone just kind of knew who Pope was going to be.
And in fact, Pope Gregory the, what was it, 7th, was the one who introduced the College of Cardinals and the electoral process.
He's going to be on our list later.
Ooh.
You just keep giving away all the...
Man, I'm just getting excited, man.
Yeah, I know. You're like a kid on Christmas who peeks at the presents, man.
But I'll keep my commentary to myself at this point. But that's an important piece.
It very is.
Delacroix brought up.
So some of the other things that he did is he commissioned St. Augustine of Canterbury to go and evangelize England. So he... that was the far edge of the world at the time. So it shows his apostolic zeal, even though he had that Benedictine background. And I think one of the things that to this day really lives on in his name is his contributions both to literature and poetry in the church, but music. And when you hear Gregorian chant, it is named after him.
Thanks be to God. Yes.
So he just like made it up.
Well, no, but a lot of it he did. He wrote a lot of the Gregorian chants.
Is this after Guido made the notes?
No, Guido was in the year about
Guido was his right-hand man.
1070.
Oh, so there was no notes in
there was
Gregorian
no notes.
chant.
No.
At that time.
No, he wrote them down, and he set up the Schola Cantorum. He codified the songs that the church would use in the liturgy. The antiphonary, he compiled that as well. So I mean, he made massive contributions to the way Catholics worship.
Yeah.
The sacred treasure of music and the fact that we have a treasury of it is because of Gregory the Great. And I had an awesome experience with fellow students from Ave Maria University in our sacred music department. We went to Salem, France, and studied under the Benedictines the various chant, and they're restoring a lot of chant. But when you think about how biblical stories were transmitted prior to anything being written down in scrolls through oral tradition, and a lot of that oral tradition was communicated by way of rhythm and melody and chant.
Yeah, because it's a very predictable rhythm, right? Like
it
helps you to memorize the text.
Yeah.
That's like the same way like the bards or like Homer. These songs, we look at like the Odyssey. This was a song. It wasn't just a long poem. So the song helped it to be, like you said, that's a really awesome point. That is the rhythm helps the memory and the pretty cool.
And then when you accompany,
that's what you had to do.
Absolutely. You had to sing a little bit.
And for you guys that don't know, there's another episode where we talked about was it the worst Catholic?
No,
songs,
no. Guido of Arezzo was a Catholic monk who established the musical notation system.
And for some reason we talked about him, and I remembered, and so I just wanted to bring that.
Just because his name was Guido.
Some of the other things that he did is that he, again, going back to that administrative prowess, which you are developing.
No, I'm just being thrown into the deep end.
Yes. Well, that's the only way you're ever going to get out of it.
I love it. I absolutely love
he
it.
reformed the ownership of church properties and the administration of properties. Some of the things that Leo didn't have the chance to get to, and through that he was able to generate budgetary surpluses, which now this is 150 years later, and Rome had fallen, and Rome was a mess, man. Rome before was a city of 1 million. At this point, it's probably down to 200,000 starving people living in muddy, infested streets. I mean, this Pope Gregory is basically living as Pope in The Walking Dead. This is post-societal breakdown. This is as bad as it can get. And he fed the people of Rome by good administration. And then he led them in worship through prayer. He wrote on extensively. He wrote on spirituality. He wrote on pastoral care. And he was the first Pope through these actions on how he was serving the people of Rome. As the Bishop of Rome and also as the Pope, he was the first Pope to give himself the title because he said, I am the servant of the servants of God. And that is a title that popes still use to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing too, like just going to England and converting them. That's a pretty big deal.
Well, that was Augustine of Canterbury, but he had the foresight and the missionary and apostolic zeal to send people forth. And yeah. All right, so let's move on to
number three.
Number three. How the seven best popes.
Are they in like order by?
Yeah, I listed them in order chronologically.
Okay.
Because I didn't want to then have a competition within the seven.
Yeah, and you don't want to mess that up because they're in heaven right now.
By the time you get on the list of
one
best
of them might
popes,
be mad or something.
Yeah, by the time you get on the list of best popes, it doesn't get better. It just gets different at that point.
Okay.
So these are the best popes, and they're all equally best.
Okay.
So the next pope that I want to talk about, now this is one of the popes that I've read a lot about, and I don't think he's very well known, but he, to me, is one of the most fascinating figures in all of history, and that is Pope St. Gregory the Seventh. Now, how many people are out there like, yeah, Pope St. Gregory the Seventh is my patron saint, or even know who he was?
Mm-hmm.
Not me.
Yeah, I thought you did all this research.
I just made the show notes.
Yeah, I'm sure. So for most of his life, he was known as Hildebrand, right? And if he had never been elected pope, even his life as Hildebrand of Savona would have made him a legendarily impactful and powerful figure in the development of Western society. Mm-hmm. He was an incredible papal legate. He was a very amazing politician, creating treaties and peace and reforms. So he was a very influential, I guess, I don't want to, in today's world, it sounds bad, but he was a career churchman, right? And he was very, very effective at it. Now,
and that's an important point that you just brought up. A lot of times we denounce, and we were talking about this last night, actually. We denounce churchmen. We denounce career politicians within the church. But when we think of the gift of administration, it's a gift of the Holy Spirit, and it's considered a gift. And we need that. I may not want to be that kind of careerism kind of. It's just really not.
It's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody. And I really, I'm cool with just offering my little administration to my little mission. But it is a gift of the Holy Spirit, and we have to realize that. The Greek word for administration is kubernesis, which gives a sense of like a ship master or a captain. And it's used throughout the scriptures, Acts of the Apostles, Revelation, different locations, in St. Paul. And to realize that Jesus is calling these captains and these people who are, career oriented in the politics of the church. We need people to maneuver the ship, and it's a challenging job. So I thank God for people who are pursuing those realities, and it shouldn't be denounced. It's just, obviously it needs to be accompanied by prayer and the gift of the Holy Spirit.
Bad politicians ruin the word politician.
Yeah, that's true.
Bad churchmen ruin the idea of bad churchmen.
That's a great point.
But good politicians are so necessary. Good churchmen are so necessary.
It's definitely a greater position of a greater pool of people who are not good at it than there are good.
But everyone complains about the government until the garbage doesn't get taken out and the roads don't get fixed. You always, it's that squeaky wheel mentality. But look, thank God for them because they are doing things that help society and community. So a lot of those politicians deserve it, and a lot of climbers in the church deserve their bad reputation. But there's some that are effective administrators who are civilly minded or organizationally minded that are just absolutely necessary. And if you think that they're not, you don't understand the way the world works. True. And you're one of those people who wouldn't know what to do with their garbage.
And speaking of Gregory the Seventh, so and organizationally, as we mentioned before, he was the one who put together the College of Cardinals for the electoral process.
Yeah.
So,
So there was cardinals before, but before that, they didn't directly elect the Pope.
And so canon law was changed. And that's also a point too. When canon law is adjusted, or like there's amendments to canon law, or things that are added into canon law, you have to look at that as like, wow, this person's pretty progressive, and they're reforming the church. So St. John Paul II, for example, his connections to
and
canon
not
law.
in the bad term of progressive that we think of,
Oh yeah, no.
Well, man, he
vaping
added
CBD and hitting people with batteries and stuff.
CBD.
But like as in making real progress in the benefit of the church.
Yes.
Sometimes progressive gets a bad term again. One of those words that people think of progressives as destroying the things behind them. But,
Socially radical.
right. Now, it's an interesting thing that how he was elected, and I think a lot of this has to do with why he established the election process of the Pope. He was one of the very few popes who was elected by what's called popular acclaim. So when his predecessor died, the people of Rome gathered outside of St. Peter's and started the chants that said, let Hildebrand be Pope, let Hildebrand be Pope. And Hildebrand heard this. He was the archdeacon. And
Not a very catchy chant.
well, it sounds better in Italian.
It sounds much better in Italian.
So he heard this and he took off running because he didn't want to be Pope because he was a humble man, right?
God bless
And
America.
he was, like Benedict didn't really want to be Pope. He
took
wanted to
off
retire.
running. I love it.
Pope Benedict wanted to
It's like,
retire.
run away.
Head for the
Look,
hills.
Head to the hills
Would
of
you want to be
Rome.
Pope? I mean, that's a lot of
Heck
work.
no, dude.
No, that's why they have, after the Pope is
God
elected, they go
bless.
into the room of tears because they cry because
yeah.
the weight of 1 billion people's on your shoulders. And their
I can't even
souls.
imagine being a bishop. Like these bishops I pray for every day.
Yeah.
That weight is, I don't even know. I mean, that's heavy, man.
Yeah, mitre weighs
That's
a lot.
why I tell you, prayer is the most important thing.
Yep.
Prayer.
So they were saying, we want him as Pope. So he took off and he went and he hid in a monastery. And they went and hunted him
they
down.
found him?
And they found him.
Yes.
And they trapped him in there. And all the cardinals show up and like, what up, Hildebrand? Where'd you go? And he's like, I had a thing.
I was just cleaning up around here.
So the cardinals
It's like
basically
in a
said,
cell with a little bed and a.
so the
doing
cardinals have
stuff.
said, nope, dude, you're the Pope now.
Here's your hat.
Long live you, Pope.
Yes.
And he's like, okay. So I think in his wisdom, he's like, this can't happen again. This is not going to happen again where we need some structure because without this, there's anarchy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
cardinals be tracking me down and making me Pope, and that shouldn't happen.
So he's looking out for the rest of the brothers after him. Yeah.
So a lot of the things of Gregory the Seventh's papacy do have to do with how the institution of bishops and popes happened. So he established and this is why he's on our list of greatest popes, because he established the election process for the Pope, the College of Cardinals. At the time, there was the thing called the investiture controversy. And the investiture controversy was where the local kings or the dukes or whomever were appointing the bishops. Or in the East, the emperor was appointing the Patriarch of Constantinople. And this is like, the government is way too up in our business. They're the ones electing a bishop, not the Pope. That makes no sense. So he fought this tooth and nail. Now, the most powerful man in Europe at the time was the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry IV. And what does a great Pope do when the most powerful man in Europe is saying, I'm going to keep on picking the bishops. I don't care what you say. And I have all the power and all the troops. What are you going to do about it? If you're Pope, what do? You excommunicate him. And that was a bold move. That could have went really wrong because he could have just marched over the Alps and had him killed and had someone else put into place. He even tried that. He actually even tried to have the election of an anti-pope to counter him. It didn't work. So after Gregory VII excommunicated Henry IV, Henry IV had didn't want to go to hell. So he walked down to the castle where the Pope was staying at the time and stood out in the snow in the front gates, and Pope Gregory would not let him in for 3 days. So he was the Holy Roman Emperor, the most powerful man in the world. Like, this is the president of the United States now. Imagine if someone excommunicated the president and the president decided to sit outside the gates shoeless in the snow wearing sackcloth, waiting for the Pope to let him in. After 3 days, the Pope let him in, recognized his contrition and lifted the excommunication. And through this process, essentially negotiated that you guys don't get to pick who bishops are. No secular power gets to elect who is the bishop of a people. Now, imagine right now if the governor of California or of Ohio was the one who picked the bishop of Los Angeles or Cleveland. Ooh. That's what would have happened. That would be a train wreck. And if it weren't for Gregory the VII, that's how the way things would have went. So that's why he's on my list of greatest popes.
That's excellent. I think of popular acclaim, like St. Ambrose was by popular acclaim. And thank God, because Milan was in a terrible situation that he was facing. And the other thing that I think of is Santo Subito.
Yep.
The whole sense of by popular acclaim, people are crying out, make this person a saint now. And JP2 received that popular acclaim. People were crying out Santo Subito at his death as well. I was one chanting that along with the crowd as well. But there's a certain sense of an importance of hearing from the people of God, how they feel toward a particular person. And there are still avenues and channels in which the people of God can make their opinion known, and strongly so. We need that.
Well, I mean, the lay people have a canonical right to let the bishops know when they see something that is an issue. So, if you see something that is wrong in your parish or something that is theologically wrong, or you suspect abuse or whatever, you can let your bishop know, and that is your canonical right, and it's good for the life of the church.
But first and foremost, you need to let the person know.
Well,
because so many people
they say start with the person,
correct,
meet with them face to face. If they are still obstinate, go to the next level. It's always the next level, but first meet directly with the lowest possible source or the person directly responsible.
Yeah, and none of our problems together have escalated beyond our own.
There was that one time.
Oh, okay.
Well, I never got called. I don't think. Actually, no. I actually have had a call from the bishop's office before. I was running a website like a decade ago, and I was like, oh, it's the Bible. I'm putting Bible readings on there. They're like, no, man, you can't be using this translation. We own this translation. And I'm like, it's the Bible. You don't own the Bible. They're like, we own this translation. You can't publish this unless you are paying for publishing royalties, because they're like, look, there's justice, and they did this work. We paid people. People spent their lives work translating. It costs money, and there's justice in paying for that. And I'm like, okay, that's fair.
The bishop himself or one of his delegates?
It was one of the delegates. It wasn't the bishop himself.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. Stealing stuff online, Ryan.
I'm stealing from the church.
You better repent.
I did. Good. I went with a public domain translation. Come at me now.
That's why I love when bishops have listening sessions. I love when pastors have listening sessions. I'm preparing a listening session for my own parish at this point. I've only been in a few months, so I'm really looking forward to developing a sense of let me hear what the pastoral needs are of our community. Let me listen to what the people are saying so that we can structure and organize an effort to meet the needs of this particular church. And we have to listen to the people of God, and we have to be able to choreograph that. But we also have to be bold against voices that may be not leading the people properly either. That's right. And I think Gregory is a perfect example of being that. I mean,
people got
to excommunicate somebody,
to excommunicate the most powerful man on the
level. Yeah,
to excommunicate the most powerful man in the world, and then have the backbone to wait and make him sit in the snow for 3 days.
That's a backbone right
there. That was it.
But the emperor had some calloused feet. I mean, that must have been pretty impressive.
So, all right, the next pope on our list is one that I think very few people know about, and that is Pope Innocent III. Know anything about him?
No, not really. I don't think. You know what? If you start, I might recall a few things. Let's see.
So Pope Innocent III, he was Pope 13th century. Early 13th century, late 12th century. Before he was elected, he was known as Lothair of Segni, right? But the reasons that he's on our list of greatest popes is he did two very important things that changed the world and the church, that the impact of cannot even be counted. And what he did was he basically allowed for the establishment of the Dominicans and the Franciscans. He was the pope that authorized that the followers and St. Francis and St. Dominic themselves, their religious orders could be get papal recognition. Can you imagine the church and the history of the church without the Franciscans or the Dominicans? no St. Francis, no Thomas Aquinas, no Padre Pio. It's unimaginable what the church would be without them. And because of that, he's got to be on the list of the greatest popes. I mean, that is a masterful move.
No Saint Junipero Serra, the missionaries to South America, to North America, to California. You know, you think about that. I mean, my goodness.
He also established the Fourth Crusade to fight the Albigensian heresy. So,
and the Dominicans were at the
ones,
forefront of that.
So there were religious orders before.
There was,
but these two that surfaced up in the Middle Ages.
Monasticism,
there was the Benedictines, there was
the Augustinians,
the Knights Templar.
So there were a bunch of religious orders and communities of men and women for sure, living out celibacy, living out poverty. But this is
But these two religious
piece.
orders were revolutionary in the way that they exercised their charisms in the church.
And talk about reformers, right? So that's why St. Francis, that revelation of being a pillar and you know, rebuild my church. You know, imagine Jesus entrusting you with something like that. You know, rebuild my church. That whole sense of being a reformer, if it wasn't for him, Francis would have never been received, recognized, and then his community affirmed, so that growth can happen, so that the rebuilding process that we even still see today with a lot of different Franciscan orders, they're still continuing that beautiful work, as well as the Dominicans.
Absolutely.
So, good
now,
point.
Another thing that Innocent III did, and again, this is why it's a tragedy that he's not more well known, is he called the Fourth Lateran Council, and that was probably the biggest ecumenical council of the Middle Ages. And what the Fourth Lateran Council established, they put in new canons into the law of the church concerning the dogma of transubstantiation. I mean, look, he gave us essentially the teaching on the true presence in the Eucharist, the Dominicans, the Franciscans, and he reformed the way that abuses of the clergy were happening. This is an important pope who is sadly overlooked by history.
Is he a saint?
No, he's not even a blessed. He's not even beatified.
I don't even see that.
So we've got to do a little cause, you know, start a little cause of praying his intercession.
Right. And I mean, accomplished a lot.
Yeah.
So I don't know the circumstances around why he has not been beatified or canonized, but either way, not every great church person has to be a saint. And if they're in heaven, they're a saint. They don't have to be recognized on earth, but
no.
Thank God for his ministry. A lot of grace there.
What
that's
do we
for
got
sure.
next? We're on number 4.
We are now on number 5. And we're going to talk about Pope Pius V.
Oh, that's a perfect number.
Pope Pius V coming in here at the 5th pick on our list. Again, a really, really important figure in the history of the church. Now, some of the things that he oversaw, so he was a great reformer, right? He was, he's coming right after the Reformation. And he was the Pope that really, I think in the greatest part, led the Counter-Reformation. He's the one who published all the works of the Council of Trent. And the Council of Trent, again, saved the church and really reestablished, that was the church's comeback album after the Reformation. It can't be overstated how important it was. He also established the norms of the Tridentine Mass. So, you know, for all you Latin Mass goers, I mean, Pius V was out here making that possible and establishing the norms for the celebration of the Mass of the Ages that for the next 500 years would create saints and encourage the life of the church and the reverence of the Blessed Sacrament. So even for that matter alone, he should definitely be listed among the great popes. But to land on this list, he also established the Feast of the Holy Rosary. Now, you know the history behind the Feast of the Holy Rosary. That is because of, in 1571, a huge force of Ottoman Turks were coming to invade Europe. And if you were a betting man, you were betting on the Ottomans. They were going to win. They completely outnumbered the resistant forces in Europe. And the Ottomans had already taken over Constantinople about 100 years before. And next was Rome. So, I mean, this is a precarious time. I mean, it could have been very much that after Constantinople, people expected Rome was going to fall too to the Turks. And you would have a, Muslim Europe. Constantinople, then Rome, then Paris. I mean, they were all going to fall because that's how powerful the Turks were. And he did something where he led and he called for the establishment of a thing called the Holy League, where he got a bunch of the Catholic leaders of Europe together and said, guys, we need to band together in the face of this threat. And then there was this massive battle that was going to be happening where the Holy League versus the Ottoman Turks. And he knew that by the establishment of this Holy League, they had a fighting chance. But do you know what happened next?
I do know what happened next, but first, before we get into that, a word from our sponsor.
Oh, well played.
Right?
Well played. Please do, though.
So we've got two wonderful sponsors, Covenant Eyes and Exodus 90, both great disciplinary tools that are out there for you. One, with Exodus 90, it's a great program for men to bond together where iron sharpens iron, where we go through a period of time of 90 days praying through Exodus and truly entering into a life of austere disciplines. So think of a cold shower in the morning, think of constant prayer of praying the rosary, and limiting your time online to just business work. So when you think about what this could provide to you in a type of fasting, spending 3 months growing closer to God and growing close to your brother, I'm telling you, it's a great program out there. I'm excited about starting it myself.
They have an excellent app that help you guide through it, help you to build your little mini fraternities with the other men who are helping you with Exodus 90. So you can go to exodus90.com or you can download the app on the iTunes or the Google Play stores.
And with Covenant Eyes, if you go now and type in a promo code on there, Catholic Talk, it'll give you 30 days free use for this basic software that prevents you from truly entering into the World Wide Web alone. Entering into the World Wide Web alone could be a dangerous situation, and you could fall into different pockets of use of pornography. This Covenant Eyes would create a sense of accountability with your friends. So men and women, this is there for you.
Yeah, a lot of anti-pornography software is a filter. And there's ways around filters. If somebody is addicted to pornography or really struggles with it, they'll find ways around it. But Covenant Eyes is revolutionary because it's an accountability software. It's not just a crude filter. It's something more. It's a way to educate the person, and it's a way to provide the infrastructure and the support for somebody who struggles with pornography, which is a massive danger to men in this world, or women as well. Yeah. And it allows for you to have somebody to lean on to help you in that struggle. So Covenant Eyes is really a very revolutionary and leading software to help people overcome or never get addicted to pornography.
And I see that as a recovery of what the apostolic communions of these original communities looked like. They would gather together under the roof of whomever was hosting, and they would come together, they would sing a hymn, they would open up the testimonies about Jesus, and they would break bread together, and they would share with one another their limitations, their sins,
Modern communication separates us because it's all done digitally. And you don't have that closeness and that accountability and that fraternity with other people. So Covenant Eyes helps to get around that and understands the way that people communicate now and helps you deal with the dangers of the digital world. So if you go to covenanteyes.com, use the promo code Catholic Talk, you get 30 days free of the software, and see if that's the solution for you if you struggle with pornography, because I know a lot of you do. It's a very common and prevalent problem, and this will help you overcome that.
So be sure to check out those two, Exodus 90 and Covenant Eyes.
Those are our partners for the show. So
the Battle of Lepanto.
There you go. Bingo. The Battle of Lepanto, October 7th, 1571. A massive Muslim fleet of ships were coming to invade Christendom. Yeah. And they were going to win. We were outnumbered, and the only thing that was standing in their way was a ragtag bunch of Catholic leaders put together by the Pope.
And Our Lady.
And let's see, there's our secret weapon.
That's the secret weapon right there.
Yeah, we had a ringer.
Yeah.
So Pope Pius V, Pope St. Pius V, he organized that everybody in all of Christendom needed to pray the rosary in anticipation of this battle. They knew it was happening any day. It was imminent. And he established just a constant praying of the rosary for the victory and the protection of Christendom. And against all odds, and with the help of Our Lady, the Holy League were able, even though massively outnumbered, to defeat the Muslim navy. And this turned the tides of history, where the advance of the Ottomans were taking over Europe. And without this, Europe and the world would look much different. And I think that's a common theme, that all these popes, the world would look different without their actions massively.
We could do a whole show on the Battle of Lepanto.
Absolutely.
That actually would be a great show. We should bring somebody in for the battle. That would be great.
So
Somebody smarter than Ryan.
it's hard to find.
What's the next pope?
well, real quick though, but because of that, he established, Pope Pius V established the feast of Our Lady of Victory, which was eventually renamed Our Lady of the Holy Rosary. So October 7th, when you're celebrating that beautiful feast day and you're praying your rosary, that's the origin of it. So that's what we owe to Pope Pius V.
Thanks, Pope Pius V.
Good looking out.
Here's to you,
Yeah,
Pope
man.
Pius V.
Pope Pius V.
He also declared
5 o'clock.
Thomas Aquinas a doctor.
He did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good job, Ryan.
Yeah.
Excellent work.
Doctor.
Doctor.
Thomas.
Thomas. Doctor.
Pius V to
Pope Pius
Pius.
X.
The 9th.
The 9th.
Ah.
The 10th is the bomb, though. He was
I
hey, hold
love
on.
Pope Pius IX.
Yeah. So now Pope Pius IX. Now here's why Pope Pius IX
Who is
belongs
this guy?
on our
Hold
list.
on. Chicken mouth.
Giovanni Maria Mastai Ferretti.
Right.
His last name's Ferrari.
Ferretti.
All right.
Yeah. John Mary.
Yeah, 19th century.
Right. So Pope Pius IX Blessed Pope Pius IX came into the papacy at an incredibly, again, difficult time. For the last 1,000 years, the popes had been secular powers as well as religious powers. They were the rulers and governors of the papal states, which was essentially a huge portion of Italy. I mean, they were essentially secular kings and also the prince of the church. Now, during the middle half of the 19th century, in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, Italy revolted, and that's called the reunification or the unification of Italy, where Italy actually became a country. Before that, you had the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, you had all the city states, you had the papal states, you had Venice and Genoa, and there are all these different powers. Well, I think it was someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Garibaldi who came in and basically led the unification of Italy as one secular country, which is the Italy that we know today. That's why they have the tricolor flag and everything like that. But for that to happen, that meant that the Pope was under actual military conflict, and the papal states were being absorbed militarily, and they lost all of their temporal power, and they were driven back into the gates only of the Vatican. So from what had been a huge nation, now was within a couple square miles. Now, dealing with all of this, that's a huge loss for the papacy, that you no longer have the income, you no longer have this secular power to buffer and to give you the freedom. And into this steps Pope Pius IX, Blessed Pope Pius IX. And he essentially, I think more than any other figure, established the modern papacy. So when we think of popes now, it's the Vatican. They are spiritual leaders. They go to other countries. They negotiate peace. They lead people on faith and morals. But for almost all the history of the papacy, this was not the case. They were a secular ruler as well, and that was most often their most important role in society. So now when we look at a pope, the way that the Pope operates in the 20th and 21st century really is due to Pope Pius IX. He established, number one, the First Vatican Council, which established the decree of papal infallibility. He was the longest serving pope in history. No pope besides him.
31 years.
Yeah, 31 years he was the pope. And having that constant, tempered and considered type of person on the See of St. Peter during this upheaval and this massive transition in the nature of the papacy, having someone so reliable in there, in today's day and age, we would not have the papacy that we have without this man. So that's why it's so important to remember what he contributed to the church.
Yeah. And another thing that he contributed to the church is receiving the Byzantine icon that today we consider Our Lady of Perpetual Help. He named that icon.
Oh, really?
He named Our
Help
Lady of
the
Perpetual
Roman people, right?
Yeah. So you think of the Redemptorists and the sense of connection to Our Lady of Perpetual Help. He was the one who gave that title to Our Lady, that beautiful icon. I love that icon.
Yeah. Actually, it was not Garibaldi. It was Victor Emmanuel.
Ah, yes.
So before I get face tweets at my face.
We've only got one left.
And he's got to be the best.
It's got to be the best.
Now-
It's either Pope Pius X.
I'll tell you right
So
now.
now, hold on. Now, before we get to our last
or
pick,
Benedict or Pope St. John Paul II.
so now before we get to our last pick,
That's the one.
I threw in some honorable
be.
mentions. Pius X. Pius
Okay.
X is just the most gentle and probably, in my mind, the most holy pope.
Yeah. I love
just
Pius
had-
X.
he was holy. I mean, you look at a picture of him, and you're like, this man communes with
Mm-hmm.
the church and with Jesus Christ. He is a holy man, and he was so simple, but he was magnificent in his simplicity. He looked regal, but he was a simple man. I think his father was a mailman,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where most of the time popes were coming from, very powerful
Noble
yeah.
families of great wealth from
Yep.
Milan and from
Yep.
northern Italy.
And this was a regular man, a very humble man who probably the most humble of popes, who today his name is, equated with just the beauty and the grandeur of real faith.
And the depths of Eucharistic devotion and the distribution of Holy
Yes.
Communion to the children.
That's right.
So that's a big deal what he provided to the church, and as well as in his youth ministry.
So
He's the first youth minister pope.
Yep.
Yeah, and he told people to go to Mass every day.
That's
He
right.
kind of encouraged
Daily
that too.
communion.
Yeah, he was very holy. Now,
Do you know the first time in the Vatican that I was able to exercise my role as extraordinary minister of Holy Communion? I was holding the chalice while the priest distributed Holy Communion by intinction. It was one of the most powerful liturgies that I just randomly happened to fall into just because I was traveling and the priest and I were having a conversation waiting to go through security. It was a group from North Carolina. And I hold that still so genuinely in my heart today because that was the first time that I operated in a form of ministry in the Vatican at St. Peter's, and I was holding the chalice right there next to his altar where we celebrated that liturgy.
All right, two more honorable mentions.
Peter.
We already did him.
Okay.
Pius XII.
Mm-hmm.
Pius XII is, oh man, what a perfect pope. As far as if you were building a pope and you wanted to let's put all the best parts of a pope into one. In my mind, Pius XII is that pope. He was prayerful. He was shrewd. He was they did that show, the young pope, and it's Pius XIII, but all the mannerisms, how Pius XII would go out and raise his arms and how he would hold his hands and the things that he wrote theologically, the things he wrote for society going through World War II and the nuclear age and all of these things. He navigated through some immensely difficult and changing times and did it well. I always say that Pope Pius XII just knew how to pope. I mean, using the word pope as a verb, he did it so
He
well.
poped so
He just
well.
knew
It
how
was
to
like
pope.
he was born to do it.
He was.
You were born to pope.
And then the last one on honorable mentions is Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI.
This would not be a show with you in it
without mentioning him.
Benedict XVI.
I don't think I'd be a Catholic without him. I mean, I was a nominal Catholic. I was baptized, but I happened to start reading a book by Pope Benedict XVI.
What was it, Introduction to Christianity? Or?
No, it was actually the life of Jesus of Nazareth.
Oh,
It was
really?
Jesus of Nazareth,
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
And I just read it and I'm like, I've never heard somebody who uses their mind in such a way that I relate to as well. And the way that he spoke, wrote, and the way his mannerisms just changed my life. And he was just, man, some of lifting the restrictions on the Latin Mass. That's going to have reverberations going into the future because the Latin Mass, those parishes keep growing and some of the other parishes keep shrinking. So that's going to have some impact going into the future. Some of the ways that he structured now, and you're just seeing the real fruits of this, how to combat sexual abuse. He did a lot of that. He set up a lot of that legwork that established what will help clean up, hopefully, this disgusting mess. He established a lot of reforms, a lot of things. So I think his history is still going to be told by historians 25, 50 years from now. But to my mind, I couldn't love Pope Benedict XVI more.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
But the last pope on our list of greatest popes is
My Pope.
St.
Our
John
Pope.
Paul the Great.
yes,
Yeah. That's my
Now,
pope, man.
I think,
growing up.
Now, he's not really officially called the Great yet, but he deserves it in any way,
needs to
every way,
happen.
shape, and form.
Absolutely.
He is Pope St. John Paul the Great.
He is.
Traveled more than any other pope. Started World Youth Day, which
Theology of
still
the-
has like an impact. I mean, even in Denver, I talked to the Bishop of Denver, Attila, at the airport, and I was like, "There's so many great things going on in Denver." I was like, "How much is that like, drawn from the Pope's visit?"
Oh, how
like,
cool.
And he's like, "It's amazing. It's a grace that still is pervading in our community."
awesome.
Can
And you know how
imagine
many
that?
vocations were born out of that Denver?
Yeah.
I've met so many people that attended that as kids.
Yeah.
And that's where they received their vocation to
I
the
read
priesthood or
something-
religious life.
I read something, and I don't have the exact numbers, but like 60% of all priests who have been ordained in the last 20 years have went to a World Youth Day. I mean, look, if that isn't something that is incredibly important and powerful, that he kind of helped rebuild the vocationary structure of the church through World Youth Day, I don't know what is. I mean, he did theology of the body. He took down communism with with his staunch refusal to bend to the USSR. He was shot and lived. He was stabbed and lived. His lifetime was
Hit by a bus and
I mean,
lived.
he fought Nazis. He fought communists. He fought sexual addiction. He fought all kinds of things. I mean, this man was just not just one of the greatest popes. I mean, he's literally one of the greatest men who has ever lived.
A great
and
mind.
period.
The most resilient spirit of joy and fearlessness, living out that call to be not afraid. His devotion to Our Lady, that is just so inspiring. His totus tuus, to give his entire priesthood and his entire life to her.
Yeah.
From the time he was a child, even before he became, when he was an adolescent.
Yeah. That's why I'm so excited about the pilgrimage, the
Yes.
Catholic Talk Show pilgrimage. For those of you who don't know, you can go to catholictalkshow.com/pilgrimage or /JP2, and you can learn more. But when we're going to get to go to Poland and we're going to get to see the place he was born and celebrate Mass,
For his 100th birthday.
we are celebrating Mass
Yes.
in the birthplace of John Paul II on his 100th birthday in Wadowice. That is incredible. And we're going to follow his life, and we're going to go.
From Wadowice all the way through Krakow, where he was
Divine-
the administrator of the archdiocese there.
We're going to see Divine Mercy,
Yes.
which he
Get some
elevated.
pierogies.
Then we're going to eat some pierogies.
Oh, we're
and some
definitely going to
beer.
eat some pierogies.
Then we're
Maybe
going to
have some glühwein
then we're going to get to go to Rome and pray and have Mass celebrated at his tomb. So
to see
Which
where
is-
the
which is
attempted
really-
assassination almost.
Which is really powerful. Like
Oh,
a
yeah.
Mass at his tomb
yeah,
just
it is.
emanates like
on this
the
pilgrimage,
glory of God. It's
we
amazing.
are going to be able to capstone or his whole life from the Mass from where he was born on his 100th birthday
He was baptized. Yeah.
to where he was buried and where his graces and his intercession are helping the church to this day. It's going to be so amazing.
It's
So
going to be awesome.
And his papacy was almost as long as Pius.
he was the second longest pope in history.
Yeah, it was pretty long.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Thank God. Amen.
Well, and one of the things that I just don't think gets recognized enough is after Vatican II, things were getting a little bit goofy. Things were getting a little bit nuts, right? I think Paul VI, Pope St. Paul VI even said the smoke of Satan has entered the church, right? And he was one of the popes who oversaw Vatican II. And he's like, look, things are going sideways. And if it weren't for this long, constant, very thoughtful and very philosophical and holy papacy, dude, Vatican II could have went really off the rails.
and thank God
not
for
have-
Pope Benedict
Yes.
and John Paul II, who were there.
Yeah.
They were at Vatican II. And it's not to say that Vatican II was the evil council from the Dark Star.
He was. Yeah, it's not the Darth Vader
It's
council.
not a Darth Vader council. But the point is that both of these boys were there, and they were at the immediacy of what was being communicated, not what was done in praxis where people just kind of did whatever they wanted to do. No, like they were there intimately contributing.
The documents,
and
not the
listening.
spirit of Vatican II.
Yeah. But even when you think of the spirit of Vatican II, like the spirit of Vatican II is rooted in the collegiality.
The spirit of Vatican II is a ghost with a sheet over it playing Kumbaya on acoustic
No,
guitar.
that is not.
Oh,
No,
I
that
thought
is
that's
not.
what the spirit of
That
Vatican
is
II was.
the opportunistic people that attached themselves and blamed it on Vatican II.
Right. I mean, this
not
is the
heart
rollout.
of
This was the
Vatican II.
rollout of a massive change in the way of the life of the church, and it could have went very difficult. I mean, you see companies rolling out new products or whatever, they launch a new business structure or website, and things go very poorly. But without John
But you
Paul
need
II,
good models that put on the clothing.
Right, but without
and I
John
tell you,
Paul
without
II
both Benedict and John Paul II, who were very close, without both of them, we wouldn't have seen it postured the way that it needed to be
it could have
postured.
snowballed and rode downhill in a way that no one intended.
Absolutely.
And so.
But thank goodness for good shepherds. Thank goodness for great bishops, including these two bishops of Rome, because where would we be without them for sure?
So those are our 7 best popes. Again, a big thank you to Charles Colomb. Make sure you go out and read his book, Vicars of Christ. It is an excellent book. I've read it probably 15 times.
That's excellent.
Love that book so much. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. If you go to CatholicTalkShow.com and click on this episode's page, I'll have a link to that in there. We'll also have links to the pilgrimage that we're doing for the life of John Paul II, the celebration. We'll have links to Exodus 90, so you can download that app, our sponsor. We'll have a link to covenanteyes.com, so you can go there and use promo code Catholic Talk, get 30 days free.
And don't forget the link on the URL that puts you to CatholicTalkShow.com. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, as well as connecting with us on all of our platforms, listening in on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, as well as connecting with us on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and like our channel, and we will continue to provide this wonderful content to you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
All these holy popes, pray for us.
Pray for us.
All right.
Amen.